April 13, 1943, Station Hypo, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton stood before Admiral Chester Nimitz with a decrypt that would change the course of the Pacific War. The message, intercepted just hours earlier and painstakingly decoded by cryptanalysts working in basement offices, cooled only by inadequate fans, revealed something extraordinary. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, mastermind of Japanese naval strategy, the most important military leader in the Imperial Japanese Navy, would be flying to Bougainville in 5 days. The decrypt provided exact departure time, precise flight path, specific aircraft type, even the composition of the escort. American codebreakers had delivered the architect of December 7th on a silver platter. The question was not whether they could intercept him. The question was whether they should. The decision to target Yamamoto would require presidential approval. The mission to execute it would demand navigation precision unprecedented in aerial warfare. The interception would test the absolute limits of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning's range and the skill of the best pilots in the Pacific. What followed would be the longest fighter intercept mission in history to that point, a strike so precisely calculated that the margin for error was measured in minutes and miles, where a single navigation mistake would mean failure, where fuel consumption rates had to be calculated to the gallon, and where timing had to be perfect across 435 miles of open ocean. This is the story of Operation Vengeance, when 18 P-38 Lightnings hunted the most important target in the Pacific, and how American precision planning achieved what Japanese military doctrine had deemed impossible: the surgical removal of irreplaceable leadership through aerial assassination. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was not simply another Japanese officer. At 59 years old in April 1943, he was the embodiment of Japanese naval power, a man whose strategic thinking had shaped the entire Pacific War. He had opposed war with America, understanding Japanese industrial inferiority, but once ordered to fight, he had planned Pearl Harbor, believing only a devastating opening blow could give Japan time to consolidate its conquests. By April 1943, Yamamoto was planning the next phase of Japanese strategy from his headquarters at Rabaul, attempting to reverse American gains at Guadalcanal. His inspection tour of forward bases was designed to boost morale among frontline units that had suffered devastating losses. The Japanese Navy considered him irreplaceable, a strategic thinker without peer in their service. His death would be more than symbolic. It would decapitate Japanese naval planning at a critical juncture. American intelligence had been reading Japanese naval codes since before the war. The effort, designated a magic, had provided crucial warnings before Midway. By 1943, Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor and Station Cast, relocated from Corregidor to Melbourne, were intercepting and decoding thousands of Japanese messages monthly. The codebreakers worked in basement facilities, hunched over code sheets, cross-referencing messages, building pattern libraries that allowed them to decrypt even messages with corrupted transmission. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort had led the Midway breakthrough. By April 1943, his team had refined their methods to the point where they could decrypt operational messages within hours of interception. The April 13th decrypt was designated JN-25, the primary Japanese naval code. The message, transmitted from Rabaul to Japanese commanders at Balalai, Shortland, and Buin, detailed an inspection tour by the Commander-in-Chief Combined Fleet. Departure Rabaul 0600 local time, April 18th. 2 Mitsubishi G-4 and Betty bombers, 60 fighters escort. Route direct flight Rabaul to Balalai, 315 miles. Arrival time 0800 Balalai. The decrypt included weather forecasts, names of officers accompanying Yamamoto, and even the menu planned for his lunch. Japanese communication security, generally excellent by 1942 standards, had failed completely. The message was transmitted in a code American cryptanalysts had partially broken. Worse, it provided operational details with precision that violated basic security protocols. Someone in the Japanese communications chain had prioritized clarity over security, assuming their codes remained unbreakable. Lieutenant Commander Layton brought the decrypt to Admiral Nimitz on April 14th. The Pacific Fleet commander read it twice, then looked at Layton with an expression the intelligence officer would remember decades later. Can we get him? Layton had anticipated the question. He had already consulted with operations staff, examined maps, and calculated distances. Yes, sir, but barely. It's at the absolute limit of fighter range. Nimitz understood the implications immediately. Killing Yamamoto would violate conventions that protected high-ranking officers from targeted assassination. It would reveal American code-breaking capabilities, potentially causing the Japanese to change their codes. It would require risking valuable pilots and irreplaceable aircraft on a mission with no margin for error. Yet Yamamoto had planned Pearl Harbor. He had ordered the attacks that killed over 2,000 Americans in a surprise assault while peace negotiations were ongoing. The man who had broken the rules of civilized warfare could hardly claim their protection now. Nimitz drafted a message to Navy Secretary Frank Knox and Admiral Ernest King, recommending approval for the mission. The message went through channels to Secretary Knox, who brought it to President Franklin Roosevelt. The president's response was immediate and unequivocal: get Yamamoto. On April 15th, authorization arrived at Pearl Harbor. Admiral Nimitz immediately contacted Admiral William Halsey, commanding the South Pacific area from Noumea. Halsey, whose hatred for the Japanese was legendary, responded with characteristic bluntness. Before we're through with them, the Japanese language will be spoken only in hell. He passed the mission to Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher, commanding air operations on Guadalcanal. Mitcher faced an immediate problem. The interception point, 435 miles from Guadalcanal, exceeded the range of every fighter in his command except one. The Lockheed P-38. Lightning, with its twin Allison engines and distinctive twin-boom design, could reach the target with external fuel tanks, barely. Mitcher called in Major John Mitchell, commanding the 339th Fighter Squadron, 347th Fighter Group. Mitchell, a veteran with 5 confirmed kills, was known for meticulous planning and navigation skill. The briefing was classified above top secret. Mitchell and his operations officer, Captain Thomas Lanphier, were shown the decrypt. Their reaction was immediate disbelief followed by careful calculation. 435 miles over water, Mitchell said slowly. That's beyond our maximum range even with drop tanks. We'll be flying on fumes. If we encounter headwinds, if we have to dogfight, if anything goes wrong, we won't make it back. Mitcher understood the risk. The alternative was letting the architect of Pearl Harbor complete his inspection tour, boost Japanese morale and continue planning operations against American forces. How many planes can you spare? Mitchell did the mathematics. 18 P-38S total, 16 would provide cover and engage the Zeros. 4 would be designated killer section, assigned specifically to the Betty bombers carrying Yamamoto. Every available long-range tank would be needed. Some aircraft would launch with tanks that hadn't been fully tested. This wasn't a problem of firepower or pilot skill. This was a problem of fuel, distance, and navigation precision. The P-38 Lightning carried 170 gallons of internal fuel. With 2 165-gallon drop tanks, total capacity reached 500 gallons. At cruise power settings, the Lightning consumed 67 gallons per hour, 435 miles to target, the same distance back. Time over target for combat, fuel reserves for navigation error. Mitchell calculated they would land with approximately 30 gallons remaining, roughly 15 minutes of flight time. There was no margin for error. A navigation mistake of even 10 miles would mean running out of fuel over the ocean. Headwinds would be catastrophic. Combat would consume fuel at accelerated rates. Every factor had to be perfect. The navigation problem was unprecedented. 435 miles over featureless ocean to intercept aircraft at a specific point at a specific time. The P-38S would fly without radio communication to avoid detection. They would navigate by dead reckoning, using compass, airspeed, and time calculations. Any error would compound over distance. Miss by 5 degrees, and they would be 30 miles off course at the interception point. Mitchell assembled his navigation team. Captain Besby Holmes had been a civil engineer before the war, accustomed to precise calculations and measurements. First Lieutenant Rex Barber was an experienced pilot with exceptional instrument skills. Together with Mitchell, they would plan the route using charts, protractors, and slide rules. The maps available were British Admiralty charts from the 1920s, supplemented by reconnaissance photographs. The route would take them due north from Guadalcanal's Fighter II airstrip, then northwest towards Bougainville. They would fly at wave-top height 50 feet above the water to avoid Japanese radar. At that altitude, they would have no horizon references, no landmarks, only endless ocean. Mitchell calculated compass headings for each leg, accounting for magnetic variation, prevailing winds, and estimated drift. The first leg, 30 minutes due north. Second leg, 1 hour northwest. Interception point, 30 miles west of Empress Augusta Bay. Total flight time to interception, 1 hour 51 minutes. The timing was equally critical. Yamamoto's Betty would depart Rabaul at 0600, arriving Balalai at 0800. The P-38S needed to arrive at the interception point at exactly 0800, not a minute earlier or later. Launched too early, and they would arrive first, circling and burning fuel while Japanese radar detected them. Launched too late, and Yamamoto would land safely at Balalai. Mitchell calculated backward from the 0800 interception time. 1 hour 51 minutes flight time into 0608 launch from Guadalcanal. But P-38S taking off in formation would take time to assemble. Engines needed warm-up time. Fuel tanks needed final checks. Mitchell scheduled a 0725 engine start, 0750 taxi, 0800 wheels up. The mission clock was set with the precision of a Swiss watch. 18 P-38S, 435 miles, 1 hour 51 minutes, all to arrive at a specific point in the sky at exactly 0800 to intercept 2 Betty bombers whose pilots had no idea they were flying into an ambush. The aircraft selected for Operation Vengeance were P-38G Lightnings, the most advanced fighters in the Pacific but still plagued by technical problems. The twin Allison V1710 engines were powerful but temperamental. The turbochargers, essential for high-altitude performance, frequently failed in the tropical climate. The ammunition feed systems jammed. The gun heaters malfunctioned, yet the Lightning had one insurmountable advantage: range. No other American fighter could reach 435 miles from base, fight, and return. The Japanese Zero could match the range, but Americans didn't fly Zeros. The assigned pilots represented the best available in the South Pacific. Major John Mitchell would lead, navigating the entire formation. Captain Thomas Lanphier, aggressive and confident, would lead the killer section. First Lieutenant Rex Barber, methodical and precise, would fly killer section. Lieutenant Besby Holmes, the navigation planner, would fly killer section. Lieutenant Raymond Hine would complete the 4-plane killer section. 12 additional P-38S would fly top cover, engaging the Zero escort while the killer section went after the bombers. Every pilot received individual briefings emphasizing 3 rules: maintain radio silence absolutely, follow Mitchell's navigation precisely, conserve fuel obsessively. April 17th brought final preparations. Ground crews worked through the night installing the external fuel tanks, checking fuel systems, arming the weapons. Each P-38 carried 4 50-caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon in the nose, all ammunition belts loaded with armor-piercing incendiary rounds designed to ignite aircraft fuel tanks. The fuel calculations were refined repeatedly. Cruise power setting 1,950 RPM, 31 inches of manifold pressure. Fuel consumption 67 gallons per hour. Allowable combat time 5 minutes at maximum power. Reserve fuel for return 50 gallons. Total fuel available at interception point 90 gallons. Enough for precisely 5 minutes of combat plus return flight with 30 gallons reserve. If combat lasted longer than 5 minutes, pilots would have to choose between continuing the fight or saving enough fuel to reach Guadalcanal. Mitchell emphasized this reality in his final briefing. We get 1 pass. If we don't get him in the first attack, we don't have fuel for a second. Make it count. The evening of April 17th, pilots tried to sleep, understanding that tomorrow would test them beyond anything they had experienced. Mitchell reviewed his navigation calculations one final time. Captain Lanphier, confident to the point of arrogance, assured everyone he would personally shoot down Yamamoto. Lieutenant Barber quietly checked his aircraft, trusting his skills more than his luck. At Fighter 2 airstrip on Guadalcanal, 18 P-38 Lightnings sat ready, each one loaded with fuel, ammunition, and the hopes of everyone who remembered December 7th. Admiral Yamamoto, at his headquarters in Rabaul, finalized his inspection schedule, unaware that American codebreakers had read his mail, that American pilots had planned his death, and that 18 fighters were preparing to fly farther than anyone thought possible to kill him. The elaborate Japanese plan to boost morale through their commander's personal presence had become an American plan to destroy morale by killing that commander. Both sides had made their calculations. Tomorrow would determine which calculation was correct. April 18th, 1943, 0725 hours, Fighter 2, Guadalcanal. Ground crews hit the starter buttons on 18 P-38 Lightnings. The Allison engines coughed, caught, and settled into their distinctive asynchronous rumble. Major John Mitchell checked his instruments, scanning fuel gauges that showed full tanks, oil pressure needles centered in their green arcs, cylinder head temperatures climbing toward operating range. Around him, 17 other Lightnings came to life, their twin boom silhouettes shimmering in the tropical heat. Mitchell had slept poorly. The navigation problem had haunted his dreams. 435 miles of ocean, no landmarks, no radio navigation aids, just compass and clock. He would lead the formation at 50 feet above the water, below Japanese radar coverage, maintaining heading and airspeed with absolute precision for 1 hour and 51 minutes. Any error would cascade. 5 degrees off course over 2 hours meant 30 miles displacement at the target. At the interception point, they needed to be within visual range of Yamamoto's formation, roughly 5 miles. The margin was razor thin. At 0750, Mitchell released his brakes and began taxiing. Behind him, the formation followed in practice sequence. 2 aborts before reaching the runway. Lieutenant Joe Moore's drop tanks wouldn't feed properly. Lieutenant Jim McClanahan's right engine showed low oil pressure. 16 P-38S continued to the runway. At the end of the strip, Mitchell ran up his engines one final time, checking magneto's propeller pitch, control response. Everything indicated normal. He glanced at his watch. 0759. He looked down the runway, checking that all aircraft were in position. Then he advanced the throttles to maximum power. The Lightning leaped forward, accelerating down the coral strip, its twin engines roaring at full power. At 90 miles per hour, Mitchell eased back on the yoke and the fighter lifted, climbing rapidly away from Guadalcanal. Behind him, the remaining P-38S followed at 10-second intervals. 1 more abort. Lieutenant Besby Holmes discovered his drop tanks wouldn't feed. He was forced to turn back, reducing the killer section from 4 aircraft to 3. 15 P-38 Lightnings turned northwest, climbing to 1,000 feet, then descending to 50 feet above the ocean. Mitchell leveled at precisely 50 feet, using the radar altimeter to maintain altitude. At this height, the ocean was a blur beneath his wings. There was no horizon, no reference except instruments. He flew by compass heading, airspeed and time, the basic tools of navigation refined to their absolute limits. The formation settled into cruise configuration. Mitchell set power at 1,950 RPM and 31 inches of manifold pressure. Airspeed stabilized at 190 knots. Fuel consumption exactly 67 gallons per hour. The drop tanks fed first, preserving internal fuel for combat and return flight. Every pilot in the formation watched Mitchell's aircraft, maintaining precise position. Any deviation from formation would increase fuel consumption. Sloppy flying meant running out of gas. The ocean passed beneath them in endless monotony. Blue water, occasional whitecaps, no ships, no aircraft, no landmarks, just ocean extending to every horizon. Mitchell checked his watch constantly, comparing elapsed time against his navigation plan. At 30 minutes he made his first course correction, turning slightly northwest. The formation followed perfectly. No one spoke. Radio silence was absolute. The only sounds were engine noise and the whisper of air past canopies. At Rabaul, 435 miles northwest of the climbing P-38 formation, Admiral Yamamoto had risen at 0500. He dressed in his green uniform, the same he had worn at Pearl Harbor. His chief of staff, Vice Admiral Motome Ugaki, would accompany him on the inspection tour along with other senior staff officers. 2 Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers waited on the flight line. The Betty was a large twin-engine aircraft, fast but lightly built. American pilots called it the Flying Zippo because it ignited so easily when hit. Yamamoto's Betty would fly first. Ugaki's would follow 300 yards behind. The escort 6 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters from the 204th Air Group would fly top cover. At exactly 0600, the first Betty's engine started. Yamamoto climbed aboard, taking his seat near the window. The aircraft taxied to the runway, accelerated, and lifted off. The second Betty followed, then the 6 Zeros. The formation climbed to 6,000 feet and turned southeast toward Bougainville, following the precise route detailed in the message American codebreakers had decrypted 5 days earlier. The flight was routine. Yamamoto reviewed papers, occasionally glancing out the window at the ocean below. The weather was perfect, unlimited visibility, light winds. The formation would arrive at Balalai exactly on schedule at 0800. Everything was proceeding according to plan. At 0734, Mitchell's formation was 90 miles north of Guadalcanal, exactly on schedule. Fuel consumption matched calculations, no mechanical problems. The P-38S droned northward at 50 feet, invisible to radar, maintaining perfect formation. At 0800, Mitchell made his final course correction, turning more westerly to intercept Yamamoto's route near Bougainville. Fuel gauges showed external tanks nearly empty. Internal tanks remained full. The timing was perfect. Mitchell checked his watch again. 0830. 28 minutes to interception. He scanned the horizon, seeing nothing but ocean. Somewhere ahead, Yamamoto's formation was approaching Bougainville. 2 separate formations flying predetermined courses were about to intersect in the same cubic mile of sky at exactly the same moment. At 0843, Lieutenant Doug Canning, flying high cover, spotted them first. He couldn't break radio silence, but he waggled his wings. Mitchell looked up and saw them. 2 Betty bombers at 6,000 feet, 6 Zeros in close escort, exactly as the decrypt had specified. Distance approximately 5 miles, slightly south of the planned interception point. Mitchell's navigation had been perfect within 5 miles over 435 miles. The error was negligible. Mitchell turned toward the targets, simultaneously climbing and accelerating. Behind him, the formation split exactly as planned. 12 P-38S climbed to engage the Zeros. 3 P-38S, the killer section now reduced by Holmes's abort, went after the bombers. Captain Thomas Lanphier, Lieutenant Rex Barber, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine advanced their throttles to maximum power and turned toward the Betty bombers. The time was 0934. Yamamoto's aircraft had been in the air for 2 hours and 34 minutes. The P-38S had flown for 1 hour and 53 minutes. The interception was precise, within 2 minutes of Mitchell's calculated time. At 0934 and 30 seconds, the mission clock that had been set with such precision 5 days earlier reached 0. The ambush was sprung. In the lead Betty, someone spotted the P-38S first. The pilot, Warrant Officer Takeo Katani, immediately pushed the nose down, diving for the treetops. Behind him, the second Betty followed. The 6 Zero escorts, caught by surprise, turned to engage, but Mitchell's top cover section was already among them. 12 P-38S against 6 Zeros at altitude, where the Lightning's superior power gave it every advantage. Captain Lanphier pulled up to engage 3 Zeros that were diving to protect Yamamoto's Betty. This decision, whether tactically sound or a mistake, would be debated for decades. By engaging the Zeros, Lanphier removed himself from the bomber attack. That left Rex Barber and Raymond Hine to pursue the Betty that was now diving at maximum speed toward the jungle. Barber followed Yamamoto's Betty down, watching it descend from 6,000 feet to treetop level. The Betty pilot was skilled, jinking violently, making deflection shooting difficult. But the P-38 was faster, more maneuverable, and closing rapidly. At 400 yards, Barber opened fire. His 450 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon converged on the Betty's right engine and fuselage. He could see his tracers striking, pieces of the engine cowling, tearing away. The Betty's right engine began streaming white smoke, then burst into flames. The aircraft continued flying, trailing fire. Barber closed to 200 yards and fired again. This burst walked across the fuselage and into the left engine. More hits, more damage. The Betty's left wing erupted in flames. The aircraft was mortally wounded but still flying, the pilot fighting for control. Barber fired a third burst, aiming at the fuselage where he knew the passenger compartment was located. The 20mm cannon shells exploded inside the Betty's thin aluminum skin. The bomber shuddered, rolled left, and dove into the jungle canopy. The time was 0936. From first sighting to shoot down, exactly 3 minutes had elapsed. Yamamoto's Betty crashed into the jungle 18 miles north of Buin on the southern coast of Bougainville. The aircraft hit the trees at nearly 200 miles per hour, disintegrating on impact. There were no survivors. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, commander of the combined fleet, died instantly in the crash. The man who had started the Pacific War with a surprise attack had died in an ambush planned with the same attention to timing and surprise he had used at Pearl Harbor. The second Betty, carrying Vice Admiral Ugaki, was also under attack. Lieutenant Hine had followed it down, firing continuously. The Betty crashed into the ocean off the coast, breaking apart on impact. Ugaki survived. Pulled from the water by Japanese rescue boats, he would be the only survivor from either bomber, living to plan the kamikaze attacks of 1945 and ultimately dying in the last kamikaze mission of the war on August 15, 1945. Above, the dogfight between P-38S and Zeros was brief and decisive. The Zeros, caught at altitude where the Lightning's superior power gave it every advantage, were quickly overwhelmed. One Zero was shot down, the others broke off and fled. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 minutes. Mitchell checked his fuel gauges. The combat had consumed more fuel than planned. He calculated quickly. They were 435 miles from Guadalcanal. Fuel remaining was approximately 90 gallons. Consumption rate at cruise power, 67 gallons per hour. Flight time home, 2 hours. Fuel needed, 134 gallons. The mathematics were unforgiving. They were 44 gallons short. Mitchell had no choice. He reduced power settings below normal cruise, leaning the mixture to the absolute minimum. Airspeed dropped to 160 knots. Fuel consumption decreased to 55 gallons per hour. At that rate, they would make it home with approximately 15 gallons remaining, roughly 15 minutes of flight time. There was no margin for error, no reserves for emergencies, no allowance for headwinds. They would arrive on fumes or not at all. The formation turned southeast, climbing to 1,000 feet for more efficient cruise. Mitchell led them on a direct heading to Guadalcanal. No deviations, no maneuvers, just straight and level flight at minimum fuel consumption. Every pilot monitored his fuel gauges obsessively, watching the needles drop toward empty. The flight home was agony. Pilots who had been keyed up for combat now faced 2 hours of slow flight over featureless ocean, watching fuel gauges approach zero, calculating whether they would make it. At 1 hour into the return flight, external tanks ran completely dry. Internal tanks showed less than 60 gallons. 1 hour of flight remaining, 55 gallons needed. The margin was down to 5 gallons, 7 minutes of flight time. Some pilots thought they wouldn't make it. Rex Barber, who had shot down Yamamoto, calculated he had maybe 10 minutes of fuel remaining when Guadalcanal appeared. At 11:50, Mitchell's formation spotted Guadalcanal. He descended toward Fighter 2, extending his landing gear at the last possible moment to conserve fuel. His engines were still running when he touched down, but the fuel gauges showed empty. He had approximately 5 gallons remaining, less than 5 minutes of flight time. The other P-38S landed in sequence. Rex Barber's aircraft sputtered as he taxied clear of the runway, engines dying from fuel starvation. He had arrived with less than 3 gallons remaining. Every aircraft made it home. Not one was lost to fuel exhaustion, though several required towing from the runway. Mitchell's navigation had been perfect. His fuel calculations had been accurate within gallons over an 870-mile mission. The mission planning had been executed with precision that bordered on the miraculous. The debriefing was immediate and classified at the highest level. Admiral Mitchell wanted confirmation of the kill. Who got him? Lanpierre claimed he had shot down Yamamoto's Betty, engaging it after driving off the Zeros. Barber insisted he had made the kill, detailing his 3 firing passes. The dispute would continue for decades, never fully resolved. Official credit was shared, though most historians now believe Barber fired the fatal shots. The operational reality was that both pilots had done their jobs. The mission was not about individual glory. It was about killing Yamamoto, and Yamamoto was dead. The initial report to Admiral Nimitz was terse. Mission successful. 2 Betty bombers shot down. Observed heavy fire and explosion. Believed target destroyed. All aircraft returned. No losses. Nimitz replied with equal brevity. Well done. The news reached Washington on April 19th. President Roosevelt was informed that Operation Vengeance had succeeded. The architect of Pearl Harbor was dead. But the victory came with immediate complications. The Japanese had not yet announced Yamamoto's death. American intelligence intercepts revealed confusion in Japanese communications. Something had happened to the commander-in-chief, but details were unclear. If America announced Yamamoto's death too quickly, the Japanese would realize their codes were compromised. The ability to read Japanese naval codes was more valuable than the propaganda benefit of announcing Yamamoto's death. Admiral King issued immediate orders: total silence. No press releases, no public statements, no leaks. The mission was classified above top secret. Even the pilots were forbidden from discussing it. The official line was that P-38S had engaged Japanese aircraft over Bougainville. Results unknown. On Bougainville, Japanese search parties found the wreckage of Yamamoto's Betty the day after the shoot-down. They discovered Yamamoto's body still strapped in his seat, thrown clear of the main wreckage. He had been killed either by the crash impact or by the cannon fire that ripped through the fuselage. His body showed evidence of 2 bullet wounds, suggesting he may have died before impact. The Japanese military faced an immediate dilemma. Yamamoto's death was a catastrophic loss, but announcing it would damage morale across the empire. The Imperial Navy decided to suppress the news for over a month. They recovered Yamamoto's body, cremated it with full honors at Buin, and transported his ashes back to Tokyo in total secrecy. Not until May 21, 1943, over a month after the shoot-down, did Tokyo Radio broadcast the announcement. Admiral Yamamoto had died in combat while directing operations at the front. The broadcast gave no details about how he died or where. Japanese propaganda presented his death as a heroic sacrifice, the commander dying while leading his men. The reality, that he had been ambushed in a carefully planned operation, was never acknowledged. American intelligence monitored Japanese reactions. The loss of Yamamoto was devastating to Japanese naval morale. He was irreplaceable. No other Japanese admiral combined his strategic vision, tactical skill, and understanding of American capabilities. His successors would prove less capable, less flexible, and less willing to take calculated risks. The Pacific War's trajectory was already determined by American industrial superiority. Yamamoto's death accelerated the inevitable, removing the one Japanese leader who understood what Japan faced and might have found ways to prolong the conflict. The ethics of Operation Vengeance were debated even before the mission was launched. Targeting a specific individual for assassination violated traditional military conventions that distinguished between killing enemy soldiers in combat and deliberately murdering enemy leaders. The Hague Conventions of 1907, which governed warfare, prohibited assassination of enemy leaders, but Yamamoto was not a civilian leader. He was the operational commander of military forces, a legitimate military target. Moreover, he had planned Pearl Harbor, an attack launched while peace negotiations were ongoing, arguably itself a violation of warfare conventions. American military lawyers concluded that killing Yamamoto was legal. He was a combatant in a military aircraft in a combat zone. Shooting down his aircraft was no different from shooting down any other enemy aircraft. The fact that Americans knew which aircraft he was flying didn't change the legality. But the broader question remained. Was targeted killing of enemy leaders good policy? Yamamoto's death certainly damaged Japanese naval operations, but it also revealed American code-breaking capabilities. If the Japanese realized their codes were compromised, they would change them, blinding American intelligence. That risk alone might have argued against the mission. In the event, the Japanese never made the connection. They attributed the interception to bad luck, a chance encounter with American patrol aircraft. They never realized the Americans had read the message detailing Yamamoto's flight plan. Japanese codes remained breakable for the rest of the war, providing intelligence that contributed to victories at Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. The code-breaking advantage was preserved, justifying the risk. The military precedent set by Operation Vengeance was profound. For the first time in modern warfare, signals intelligence had enabled the targeted killing of an enemy leader. The template was established. intercept communications, identify high-value targets, plan precision strikes. This template would be repeated countless times in future conflicts, from Israeli operations against terrorist leaders to American drone strikes in Afghanistan. The operational model originated with 18 P-38S over Bougainville. The technological elements were equally significant. The mission demonstrated that long-range fighter operations were feasible if meticulously planned. Navigation over featureless ocean could be accomplished with compass, clock, and careful calculation. Fuel management could be refined to the point where missions could be flown at the absolute limits of aircraft endurance. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning proved its value as a long-range interceptor. Its twin-engine reliability provided safety over water. Its range exceeded any single-engine fighter. Its firepower, 450 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, was devastating against unarmored bombers. The Lightning's performance at low altitude, where the mission was flown, matched or exceeded the vaunted Zero. American pilots who had been intimidated by Japanese fighter superiority gained confidence. The Zero was beatable. The P-38 could take it. The Japanese were not invincible. But the true lesson of Operation Vengeance was about planning precision. 18 aircraft had flown 870 miles, arrived at a specific point in the sky, within 2 minutes of planned time, intercepted targets exactly as predicted, and returned safely. Every aspect of the mission had been calculated, rehearsed, and executed with precision. The margin for error had been minimal. Actual error had been negligible. This was American military efficiency at its peak. Not brute force, not overwhelming numbers, but careful planning, precise execution, and technological superiority applied intelligently. Major John Mitchell received the Navy Cross for leading the mission. Captain Thomas Lanphier received the Navy Cross for shooting down a Betty bomber. Lieutenant Rex Barber received the Navy Cross for shooting down a Betty bomber. The dispute over who actually killed Yamamoto continued for decades. Lanphier, more outgoing and confident, claimed credit publicly. Barber, quieter and more modest, insisted he had made the kill but didn't pursue public recognition. Post-war analysis of Japanese records, American gun camera footage, and pilot testimony suggests Barber fired the fatal shots. But the question ultimately doesn't matter operationally. The mission succeeded. Yamamoto died. The careful planning that made the interception possible was far more important than the question of which pilot fired the killing burst. The mission demonstrated something more profound than individual heroism. It proved that intelligence, planning, and precision could accomplish what brute force could not. 18 fighters had achieved what thousands of bombers and dozens of carrier strikes had failed to accomplish: the elimination of Japan's most important military leader. Admiral Chester Nimitz understood the mission's significance. In a private letter to Admiral Halsey, he wrote that Operation Vengeance had removed the one Japanese leader who truly understood American capabilities and might have devised effective countermeasures. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was immediate and lasting. If Yamamoto could be killed, no one was safe. American reach extended everywhere. The myth of Japanese invincibility died over Bougainville along with the admiral who had created that myth. For the pilots who flew the mission, it remained the defining moment of their combat careers. They had flown farther than anyone thought possible, navigated with precision over featureless ocean, fought successfully, and returned safely. The mission validated everything they had trained for. The aircraft had performed, the planning had worked, the execution had been flawless. Years later, Rex Barber would reflect on the mission with characteristic understatement. It was long, it was dangerous, and we were lucky to have enough fuel to get home. But we did what we came to do. Yamamoto planned Pearl Harbor. We planned his funeral. Seems fair. The strategic impact of Yamamoto's death has been debated by historians for decades. Some argue it was decisive, removing irreplaceable Japanese leadership at a critical moment. Others contend that by April 1943, Japan had already lost the war. American industrial production was overwhelming Japanese capacity. No admiral, however talented, could change those fundamental mathematics. The truth likely lies between those extremes. Yamamoto's death didn't change the war's outcome. American victory was inevitable, but his death accelerated that victory. His successors were less capable, less flexible, less willing to take calculated risks that might have prolonged the war. The Pacific War might have lasted another year without Operation Vengeance. Thousands of American lives might have been lost. The calculation was simple. 18 fighters, 5 minutes of combat, 1 dead admiral. The cost was minimal. The benefit was substantial. By any measure, Operation Vengeance was one of the most successful targeted strikes in military history. The technical achievements should not be understated. In 1943, navigation over the open ocean required skills that are now obsolete. GPS did not exist. Radar navigation aids were primitive. Radio silence meant no course corrections. Mitchell navigated 435 miles by compass, airspeed, and elapsed time, arriving within 5 miles and 2 minutes of his planned interception point. Modern militaries with satellite navigation and real-time data links struggle to achieve such precision. Mitchell accomplished it with a compass, a watch, and a slide rule. The fuel management was equally impressive. Every gallon was accounted for. Consumption rates were calculated before the mission and verified in flight. Power settings were adjusted to squeeze maximum range from available fuel. The formation returned with an average of 5 gallons per aircraft, representing less than 5 minutes of flight time. This was not luck. This was an engineering calculation refined to its absolute limits. The weapon's performance demonstrated American firepower superiority. The P-38's concentrated armament, all guns mounted in the nose firing parallel without convergence issues, created a stream of fire that destroyed targets in seconds. Barber's 3 firing passes, totaling perhaps 10 seconds of actual trigger time, fired approximately 200 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition and 40 rounds of 20mm cannon fire. This volume of fire, concentrated on the Betty's engines and fuselage, was overwhelming. The Betty, despite its speed and range, was lightly constructed with minimal armor and no self-sealing fuel tanks. American intelligence had identified these weaknesses. The P-38's armament was specifically effective against such targets. Japanese aircraft design philosophy emphasized performance over protection. American design emphasized both. The result was predictable. When American fighters engaged Japanese bombers, the outcome was rarely in doubt. The intelligence achievement was perhaps most significant. Station Hypo's codebreakers had provided not just warning of Yamamoto's flight, but precise details that made interception possible. Without the decrypt specifying departure time, route, altitude, and aircraft type, planning the mission would have been impossible. The code-breaking effort represented thousands of hours of work by hundreds of analysts. They had built pattern libraries, developed decryption techniques, and refined their methods until they could read Japanese naval communications almost in real time. This intelligence advantage was America's secret weapon. Every Japanese message was potentially readable. Every operation could be anticipated. Every movement could be tracked. The Japanese never realized the extent of the compromise. They attributed American successes to luck, superior numbers, or better technology. They never understood that Americans were reading their mail, anticipating their moves, and planning counters before Japanese operations even launched. Operation Vengeance validated the intelligence investment. Years of work breaking Japanese codes had enabled one precisely planned strike that removed Japan's best naval strategist. The return on investment was incalculable, but maintaining the intelligence advantage required discipline. The temptation to exploit every decrypt was strong. If Americans acted on every piece of intelligence, the Japanese would realize their codes were compromised. Admiral Nimitz and his intelligence staff carefully rationed the use of signals intelligence, ensuring operations could be plausibly explained by other means. Yamamoto's death was attributed to a chance encounter with patrol aircraft. The Japanese accepted this explanation. Their codes remained compromised. American intelligence continued reading Japanese naval communications for the remainder of the war. The discipline to sacrifice short-term tactical advantages for long-term strategic intelligence was difficult but essential. Operation Vengeance demonstrated that sometimes the intelligence could be exploited if the operational security was maintained. The mission also revealed the importance of inter-service cooperation. Although the operation was planned and executed by Army Air Force pilots flying from a Navy-controlled base, supporting a Navy fleet commander's strategic objectives, there was no inter-service rivalry. Navy Admiral Mitcher commanded Army Major Mitchell without friction. The mission's importance transcended service loyalties. Everyone understood the target's significance. Everyone worked toward the same objective. This cooperation was not universal in World War II. Army-Navy rivalries complicated many operations. MacArthur and Nimitz frequently clashed over strategy and resources. But at the operational level, where pilots and planners worked together, professional competence usually overcame institutional rivalries. Operation Vengeance was an example of that cooperation working perfectly. The political dimensions were complex. President Roosevelt's decision to authorize the mission was not automatic. He understood the risks, both operational and diplomatic. Killing Yamamoto might trigger Japanese retaliation against American prisoners. It might harden Japanese resolve to fight to the bitter end. It might be condemned internationally as assassination rather than legitimate warfare. Roosevelt weighed these risks against the potential benefits and concluded the mission was justified. Yamamoto had planned Pearl Harbor. He had killed American servicemen in a surprise attack. He was planning operations that would kill more Americans. Removing him from the battlefield was legitimate military action. The decision was consistent with Roosevelt's general approach to the Pacific War. He granted his military commanders wide latitude to conduct operations as they saw fit. He did not micromanage tactical decisions, but the decision to kill Yamamoto was significant enough to require presidential approval. Roosevelt provided that approval without hesitation. The Japanese response to Yamamoto's death was revealing. The month-long delay before announcing it demonstrated their understanding of the psychological impact. Yamamoto was more than a military commander. He was a symbol of Japanese naval power, a reassuring presence who guaranteed that professional competence guided Japan's war effort. His death was announced with state funeral honors. His ashes were divided, with portions interred at multiple sites. He was elevated to posthumous heroism, presented as a warrior who died leading his men. The propaganda carefully avoided mentioning that he died in an ambush, that his aircraft was shot down by enemy fighters who knew exactly where and when to find him. Such details would have raised uncomfortable questions about Japanese communication security and operational planning. Yamamoto's successor, Admiral Minichi Koga, was competent but not brilliant. He attempted to continue Yamamoto's defensive strategy, conserving strength for a decisive battle that would cripple the American advance. But Koga lacked Yamamoto's strategic vision and operational flexibility. More significantly, he lacked Yamamoto's credibility with the army leadership. Yamamoto had been able to argue for naval priorities and win resources. Koga could not. The Japanese army increasingly dominated strategic planning, diverting resources to operations in China and Southeast Asia, while the Navy struggled with insufficient support. Yamamoto might have fought more effectively for naval resources. His successors could not. This shift contributed to Japanese naval decline in 1944 and 1945. The lessons learned from Operation Vengeance influenced subsequent operations. Long-range fighter missions became standard. The P-38's success validated the twin-engine fighter concept for the Pacific theater. Fuel management techniques developed for Vengeance were applied to later missions. Navigation procedures were refined and taught to new pilots. The entire Pacific Air War was influenced by what Mitchell and his pilots had accomplished. Fighter range became a priority in aircraft development. The P-38 was supplemented by the P-47 Thunderbolt with drop tanks, and eventually by the P-51 Mustang, which could escort bombers all the way to Japan. But the P-38 remained the first American fighter to demonstrate that range and firepower could be combined in a single airframe, capable of operations across the vast Pacific distances. For the families of Pearl Harbor victims, Operation Vengeance provided measure of justice. The man who had planned the attack that killed their loved ones had paid with his life. The satisfaction was not universal. Some argued that killing Yamamoto had been too merciful, that he should have been captured and tried for war crimes. Others felt that focusing on individual revenge distracted from the larger strategic objectives. But for most Americans who remembered December 7th, 1941, Yamamoto's death was fitting retribution. He'd started the war with a surprise attack. He had died in a surprise attack. The symmetry was poetic. The Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor without warning while peace negotiations were ongoing. Americans had attacked Yamamoto after breaking his codes and reading his travel plans. Both were surprise attacks. Both exploited intelligence advantages. Both aimed to cripple enemy capabilities through a single decisive strike. The difference was that Pearl Harbor failed to achieve its strategic objectives while Operation Vengeance succeeded completely. The 18 pilots who flew Operation Vengeance became legends within the fighter community, though their achievement remained classified for years. They had accomplished something unprecedented, flying farther than any previous fighter mission, navigating with absolute precision, fighting successfully, and returning safely. Mitchell's navigation was studied at training schools. Barber's gunnery was analysed in tactical reports. The fuel management was incorporated into operational planning manuals. Every aspect of the mission became a case study in how to plan and execute complex operations. The mission also demonstrated the value of pilot quality. The men selected for Operation Vengeance were not rookies. They were experienced combat pilots with proven skills. Mitchell had 5 kills. Lanphier had multiple kills. Barber was a trained instrument pilot. Holmes was an engineer. Every pilot in the formation understood navigation, fuel management, and combat tactics. This expertise made the mission possible. Rookie pilots could not have accomplished what they did. The technological limitations of 1943 make the achievement even more impressive. Modern fighters have heads-up displays, GPS navigation, data-linked tactical information, and fuel computers that constantly calculate range and endurance. The P-38 pilots had magnetic compasses that were affected by the aircraft's metal structure, airspeed indicators that were accurate only if properly calibrated, and fuel gauges that were notoriously unreliable. They navigated by dead reckoning, calculating wind drift and compass variation manually. They estimated fuel consumption based on power settings and elapsed time with no computer assistance. They communicated by hand signals, maintaining radio silence throughout the mission. The fact that they succeeded under these constraints demonstrates skill levels that modern pilots with modern technology might struggle to match. The tools were primitive. The execution was perfect. The moral questions raised by Operation Vengeance remain relevant today. When is it legitimate to target specific individuals for killing? What distinguishes assassination from legitimate military targeting? How should intelligence advantages be exploited while maintaining ethical constraints? These questions have no easy answers. Different cultures and legal systems provide different frameworks. International law has evolved since 1943, but fundamental ambiguities remain. Yamamoto was clearly a military target. He was the operational commander of enemy forces, actively planning operations that would kill American servicemen. Under any interpretation of the laws of war, he was a legitimate target. The controversy arises from the premeditated nature of the attack. Americans didn't encounter Yamamoto by chance. They hunted him deliberately, using intelligence to plan his death with surgical precision. Does this cross a line from warfare to murder? Most legal scholars conclude it does not. The method of targeting doesn't change the legitimacy of the target. If Yamamoto could legally be killed in random combat, he could legally be killed in planned combat. The intelligence advantage is irrelevant to the legal question. But the policy question remains separate from the legal question. Was killing Yamamoto good policy? The answer appears to be yes. His death damaged Japanese naval effectiveness. It demoralized Japanese